Hey guys, how's it going? My name's Levi, and today I'm going to be talking about some books that I've read this year that I've really enjoyed. So, a little bit of background first, since this is the first video on this channel. I was a big reader as a kid, but as I got into my teenage and college years, I fell out of it and I stopped reading as much. And it's only been recently, actually, last December, due to training to run a marathon, I started listening to audiobooks with my girlfriend, and that got me back into reading. So, thanks to that, today I have a bunch of books that I get to share with you because I've reignited my love for reading. So, all these books are basically going to be read during that time frame of last December to now. And so, these are just my favorites that I've read so far. I kind of have been trying to figure out exactly what I like. I definitely think I lean more towards sci-fi and fantasy type books, but I enjoy other styles of books as well, and I'm not afraid to really pick up anything. So I was kind of hoping to have a suggestion for everyone in this, depending on what type of genre you enjoy reading. So the first book that I'm actually going to start off, I don't have a physical copy of because I listened to it on audio, but that is the second book of the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. Now, what is there to say about Dungeon Crawler Carl? So if you haven't heard of Dungeon Crawler Carl before, it's basically what you would call a lit RPG or progression fantasy. So it's focused on a character that's going to be getting stronger over time, and we're progressing through this kind of video game-like environment where the world has been destroyed and all matter in the world has been repurposed, including a lot of people, because 90% of people in this book, or not, I think it's 99 actually, percent of people die as soon as the book starts. All the matter has been repurposed to create a video game type level where our main character, along with his girlfriend's cat, Princess Donut, are tasked with basically trying to survive because the game is life or death, and that's the gist of the book. It's hilarious. It's really witty. It's very good on audio, so if you have Audible, I'd highly recommend listening to it. I haven't actually read the book, but listening to it, the voice actor does a wonderful job and really adds to the experience, I'd say. And I chose specifically the second book in this series because while I really enjoyed the first book, the second book just had a little bit more of an emotional impact to me. There's a couple moments in there that were actually very almost heart-wrenching, not extremely sad or anything, but just packs some emotional punches, which I really appreciate in my books. So that one just stood out for me. I haven't gotten to the third book yet, but I definitely plan on doing so here soon. So that's the first book I was going to be adding. It's really kind of these first two are really kind of honorable mentions. I wouldn't really say they are my favorite books, but for the genres that I've read, they definitely are up there. But I really was setting out to do a top 5 out of the books I've read thus far for this year, but decided to throw some other things in there that were just cool and I wanted to talk about. So that's the first of those honorable mentions. And I should also mention that none of these books are really in any particular order. There is definitely a book that I have that is definitely my favorite out of these 5, but it is not by any means, I love all these books. I enjoyed my time with all of them, and I'm pretty sure every single one of them, looking at the stack, I would be willing to reread. So yeah. So going into the second book actually surprised me a bit. I have it here. It was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So this book, actually, I read it in high school, and I really didn't enjoy it then. I don't think I was in a good space to really read this book then. I also think being forced to read a book like how you are in school is not the most intuitive thing for enjoying the book, but I really didn't enjoy it, and I thought all the characters were just really, full of themselves, and the entire book was just kind of about that. And to be fair, in some ways they kind of are, but I actually read this book all in one sitting on a flight, and revisiting this book I really enjoyed it. It has this certain level of feeling that I haven't felt with very many books, and it just really captured me in that moment, and I couldn't put it down. I said, I read it in one sitting, so I was I think I had 20 or 30 pages, and I was in the Uber coming back home and just trying to finish this book before I got home so I could have it finished because it was just so captivating in that moment. So I think this is a really good book for someone who wants to just read a small book, because it's pretty small. It's 180 pages. Once again, this is a book that I'm sure many people have read and are familiar with, but maybe you were like me and maybe you had a negative experience with it, and I would definitely recommend revisiting it when you feel like you can, because I'm really glad that I did. This book, there's scenes that I still think about a lot from this book, and it was very, very captivating on a reread. But like I said, I didn't enjoy it the first time. So I really only included this one as an honorable mention as well because I wanted a classic book in here. None of my books in the top 5 are classics. I have read a couple classics, and I plan to read more, But I think this is my favorite classic I've read thus far this year, so I included it in here for that. There's a lot of books that I would say I enjoyed more than this book that didn't make this list, but like I said, I kind of wanted to include something. My two honorable mentions, one was kind of a lit RPG, progression fantasy thing, because that was a new genre to me, and I wanted to include a book that I enjoyed from that, and then a classic, because I figured might as well. I've read a couple of them, and they're definitely worth the time reading, and this book was my favorite classic I've read thus far this year. So now we're getting into the real list. So for my, I shouldn't say my number 5, but for the 5th book in this list, because like I said, they're not ranked in any order, this book actually was the book that reignited that reading. So like I said earlier, me and my girlfriend are doing, we've been marathon training, so that leads itself to really long runs. And we were trying to figure out things we could do during those really long runs, and she has always been a reader, so she was like, we should listen to an audiobook, and there's one that I really enjoyed, and I was like a little hesitant at first, but I gave it a chance, and ended up really enjoying the audiobook, and in fact, it made me to the point where I am today, where I've been obsessive with reading, and reading way too many books, and it's almost the only thing I can think about a lot of times. But so the book that I'm talking about here is John Green's The Anthropocene Reviewed. So I don't think this book is really that talked about from what I've seen. Let me hold it like that. But it's really interesting. So first off, John Green, I haven't read any of his other books. I know that they're kind of like YA romance stuff from my understanding. I could be wrong on that. Let me know if I am. So it's not really my forte. I don't read too much romance. I like to have romance in my books, but I wouldn't read a book necessarily focused on romance. So any connotation you have about that does not apply here. This is basically like a nonfiction memoir style book where he goes through different things. Each chapter is focused on a different technology or just random things. Like you can have a chapter focused on air conditioning, you can have a chapter focused on a specific painting, whatever it is though. In this book, he takes that and gives you a history lesson, or gives you a lesson about whatever it is he's talking about, and then he ties it to his own life, and that's where the memoir style comes in, because he kind of ties it in this personal way, and it's very there's a lot of heartfelt and beautiful things written in this book that I really enjoyed. And like I said, if I didn't read this, I wouldn't have read any of these other books. So I really appreciate the fact that he wrote this. And if you haven't, and you want to give a nonfiction memoir style book a chance, I'd really recommend this one. I think it's really brilliant, and there's some chapters that I think I'll never forget. It's also really cool because it's a book you can kind of just pick up and read a chapter of wherever, because they don't really correlate in anything. So I would definitely recommend picking up this book if you haven't. Okay, so like I said, I definitely think I lean a little bit more towards the sci-fi and fantasy stuff. So it was inevitable that I would have to have a Brandon Sanderson book on this list, because that is one of the authors that I have been introduced to as a result of reading more sci-fi and fantasy, and I'm very glad that I have. He's an author that I've definitely enjoyed thus far this year, and I've read many books by him, but I think my favorite thus far is Hero of Ages, which is the 3rd book in his Mistborn Era 1 series. There's the cover. So it's hard to talk about this book without talking about the series as a whole. I love the entire series. The entire series was really good. But the 3rd definitely was my favorite, just because he has such a strong ending with this book. And it just blew me away. This ending made me feel so much, and I really enjoyed this book. As a whole, I guess without giving any spoilers, because obviously this is the 3rd book in a trilogy, so I can't really talk about what the book is about necessarily, but I can talk about the series. So the series is it's basically, we have these people who have powers whenever they eat, or I shouldn't say eat, whenever they consume certain types of metals, and we have some class struggles and some stuff like that go on in this book. But this 3rd book, first off, all the books are really good. They all kind of have their different feel to me. They focus on different things. The first book is definitely a very much so heist book, and then it kind of moves into something different in the next 2, and the 3rd book is very different as well. But I think that one specifically was my favorite, because I thought Brandon Sanderson just really landed that ending, and I have heard that he's very well known for his endings. And of the 4 books that I've read from him thus far, I've enjoyed every single one of them. So I really just recommend Brandon Sanderson as a whole if you get a chance to read him. I'm sure if you are a sci-fi or fantasy fan, you've probably read many of his books, probably more than I have. And tell me which ones I should read next. the one I had my eye on next was Warbreaker, because I was trying to kind of like follow an optimal type reading order for the Cosmere. But if you have a different idea, then let me know. So far, I've read this Era 1 and I've read Elantris, and I was following like an online guide thing, and it was saying that like I could read Warbreaker, then the Emperor's Soul, and then basically it would be a good point for me to start A Way of Kings and the Stormlight Archive, which I really want to get to, but I wanted to try to. I guess I'm kind of completionist in that sense, where I want to read everything up to that point. So like, I don't want to skip a bunch of books and then read the Stormlight and then not get certain references. I want to understand those references. So that's why I've been reading everything of his publication before that ties into it, at least. Not everything by all means, but the stuff that I've heard, at least from online, fits in with everything else. So yeah, Brandon Sanderson, excellent fantasy author. Really enjoyed that book, and I'm going to continue reading his books in general, and I would recommend it to anyone who really likes hard magic systems in their books, likes rules. I guess that's another thing I didn't really cover, but he's known for his hard magic systems, obviously. So, but yeah, I would recommend that book to anyone who likes really hard magic systems, so magic systems that you kind of understand. That was one of the things I really enjoyed about the book. I'd never read a book with that type of magic system before, or that series at least. And it was really interesting because I felt like I could actually understand how the magic system works and kind of like think about or like imagine what I could do with that magic system if I was in that scenario, which I found very interesting because most magic systems are very vague and it kind of seems like the character can do what they want. Sometimes there's some established rules, but this one is very rigid, and I really enjoyed that, and I will definitely be continuing with his books where he has those type of systems. All right, so our third book that I read is absolutely brilliant. Once again, unfortunately, so a lot of these books are in series. A lot of the books I read for sci-fi and fantasy tend to be parts of series. Oh, I just kind of showed it, but it is Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. So, what to say about this book? Red Rising. This is part of the Red Rising saga. It's technically part of the first 3 trilogy, which is all I've read up to this point, and it is absolutely brilliant. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. They're pretty short books, and they're really easy reads. So, like, I had some friends that I recommended this book to who don't read, and they've picked it up, and they've absolutely loved it. Well, not this one. This is the second book, so don't start with this one. But Red Rising as a whole, and they've started reading as a result of it as well. So I think this is a really easy gateway to read a book. I think Brandon Sanderson is too, but Red Rising, Pierce Brown, we have like a sci-fi, space opera, Star Wars type society that's like Roman inspired, and it's just so brutal. And if you enjoyed the Hunger Games, then you'll enjoy the first book. But I think my favorite of the series is this second book, where we really see, without giving too many spoilers, we really see more of this space society that was kind of teased at in the first book. And I think the third book, Morningstar, is also excellent. Like I said, that's the only 3 I've read, and it was very close to being here. I had to really think about which one of these books I wanted to include on this list. But if you've read this book, then this ending of this book it's just mind-breaking. Like, I did not see anything coming, and if you get here and you read the ending, you will enjoy it. Well, you will be captivated. How about I say that? It is a very, very good book. I think I read like 80% of this book in one day, just on a Sunday afternoon. I just couldn't put it down. And like I said, it was amazing. So this is something I would recommend if you want something more of like a space sci-fi type read. Because, man, this book does space opera so well. I've read a couple space operas now, and I've enjoyed all of them. I haven't finished all of them by any means, but the ones I've read, I've really enjoyed. It's a genre that I really like, which specifically this and Sun Eater. I really enjoy both of these, like, it's almost like sci-fi fantasy style genres where we have sci-fi and it's in space and it's in a futuristic society, but it has like a fantasy feel, and you have like these different like class hierarchy systems. I really enjoy those. And yeah, so if you have thought about picking up Red Rising, I would definitely recommend it. One thing I will say in regards to this book, though, is that while I really did enjoy Red Rising, it was early on in my reading of this year, this second book is phenomenal. So if you read Red Rising and you're like, yeah, I enjoyed it, but like I don't get all the hype, I would say push on if you have the time and you're willing. This book is worth it. So yeah, so that is my second book, or not my second book, it's my third book of the actual 5 that were mentioned in this list. Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. Highly recommend. So our next book is actually probably these next two books are my top two authors thus far that I've read this year. I enjoy all the authors I've mentioned up to this point, and will continue to read all their books. But of the authors that I've read so far this year, these two have definitely captivated me the most and made me want to keep turning the pages. So the first one, once again, part of a series, unfortunately. So I can't recommend you start with this book, but if you get to this book, I really enjoyed it. It was very hilarious and captivating, and that is Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. Joe Abercrombie his writing is just phenomenal. And the characters in this book is crazy. So I guess I should give a little bit of a background. I don't really know how to give background on this book, actually, because to be honest, I read the entire Blade itself, which is the first book in the series, and I did not understand what the plot was. I just knew that I liked the characters and that there was a lot of funny moments, and that's about what I understood. I was drawn into these characters. The plot in this book there's a plot somewhat, but it's not the focus of the book. The focus, as if you've heard anyone talk about this book or you read it yourself, you know that the focus of these books is not really the plot, but it's the characters. And the characters, man, they are so human. They are so real. I should mention this is a grimdark book, so it's a little bit darker than the other books that we've mentioned thus far. We have a little bit more of morally ambiguous characters, and they can make some somewhat worse decisions, and there can definitely be some grittier stuff in this book, but man, if you have a stomach for that stuff, this book is phenomenal. I've heard that the third book in this series, The Last Argument of Kings, is actually supposed to be the best book in this trilogy, and I haven't read that one yet, so that is high up on my TBR that I want to read soon. So maybe that book would fill this spot instead of this one, but this book specifically, the reason that I like this one so much more than the first one is because, like I said, we do have a little bit more of a plot in this book, and there's some characters in this book that I was kind of felt like they definitely had their own voice in the first book, but I felt a little lackluster about them. They weren't captivating me as much as some of the others, and I feel like they really, really developed in this book. There wasn't a character in this book that I didn't enjoy following. I feel like a lot of these books, for the last three I've covered with Brandon Sanderson, Joe Abercrombie, Pierce Brown, these are all really big, prolific authors with very popular series. So these aren't the most deep-cut picks, but I highly recommend, if you haven't read these books, definitely pick them up. They're phenomenal. And lastly, I think this last book I saved the best for last. This is the book that I will define as my favorite book thus far, and a book that I have extremely enjoyed and have already considered rereading this year, in fact, but have more of this person's catalog to get to, so I will not be rereading it yet. And it is the largest book on this list, so I can't necessarily say. So rereading it would take some time, but it is an author that I was very excited to try out because I had never read any of his work, and he is very prolific, probably the most prolific writer on this list, and I really am glad that I did because I have really been enjoying going through his catalog. And the first book I read by him, and thus far of the four books, I believe, well, 5, I'm reading another one right now, but of the 5 books that I have tasted of this author, that's a weird thing to say, 5 books that I've glimpsed of this author, this is my favorite by far. I think this book is brilliant, this book is amazing, and that book is 11/22/63 by Stephen King. Wow, what can I say? So this book, first off, I guess I should give you a bit of a background on the premise. Premise is we kind of have a time travel thing going on, and our main character, to put it very simply, our main character is sent back in time, and he has to stop the JFK assassination. But one of the big caveats is that he is not sent back in time right before the assassination. He is sent back in time, I believe it's 4 years before the assassination even takes place. So not only does he have to stop the assassination, he has to live in this time period and stay here for a while, and he has to be a part of this time, and it's kind of, most of the book is not about the JFK assassination. Sure, it is a major plot point, and he is definitely dealing with a lot of things about it, but it's also just about him living in this time period. It's about him being there and all the things that he goes through while he's there. One thing I will say about this book is that, first off, I've heard from a couple different places that Stephen King is not known for having the best endings. And this book nails the ending. I thought this ending was beautiful. It's up there with The Hero of Ages that we mentioned earlier, but this book was just brilliant all around. I blew through this book, and this is not a small book by any means. Ignore the coffee stain. This book is a big book. It is right at, in this version at least, it's right at about 850 pages. So it is a bigger book, but man, did it not feel like it. I was just blowing through this book, turning page after page. I think there was one day where I read like 250 pages just from this book, just because I was so captivated by it and its characters. And man, like, I cannot recommend this book enough. One thing I'll say is that this is time travel, but it is definitely a focus on, he kind of slips a romance in there that is just absolutely beautiful. It's romance that's done really well, and not the center plot of the, like, it's not the center of the plot, but it is just done brilliantly. Like, I find myself thinking about this book the most out of all the books on this list, and mostly it's like the ending and the characters and just a lot of different things. I think I'll probably have more videos in general about Stephen King, because this is an author that after this I was like, I have to read more. So I've read some more Stephen King books, and I would love to talk about those, because I'm really enjoying reading his books and just my journey through all of his work. Because like I said, before this year I had never read a single Stephen King book, and I've really been, he's definitely, I think, fantasy-wise, Joe Abercrombie is probably my favorite author in that genre, but overall, if I had to pick out a book blindly from anyone, it would probably be Stephen King. And I don't think it's an uncommon opinion. I think he's loved for a reason. He's so prolific for a reason, and man, if you haven't, and you are interested in the JFK assassination, or time travel, or you just want to read a really good book, read this one, man. This book is brilliant. It touched my soul. Well, I thank you guys for listening to me ramble about these books for a while. I really enjoyed doing this, and I'm going to make another video at some point about something else, but who knows when that will be or what it will be about. If you have any ideas, let me know. If you have any book recommendations, also let me know. Like I said, I'm still new to this whole reading thing, and I'm just kind of opening this channel as a way to document my progress with the books that I'm reading and what I think about them. So if you made it this far, I appreciate it. I'll see you guys later.